Shooting film is a process that involves a variety of steps between loading that film into your camera and being able to see your final image. It's correctly exposing, properly using the camera, loading and unloading, developing with the proper chemical process, or taking it to a lab that's going to be able to do that for you, printing it if you want physical copies, and doing a digital transfer either yourself or having that done by a lab as well so that you can easily edit and share what you've shot. With photography film, it's not too hard to take control of many of these steps for yourself. Developing rolls at home isn't difficult for beginners to get into, and scanning those rolls can be done with flatbed scanners like this Epson V700, or crappy scanning units like this Kodak Slide and Scan, or camera scanning setups where you rephotograph your images digitally. But motion picture film can be a little more difficult to work with if you're hoping to avoid using a lab for everything. And that's primarily because working with motion picture film involves working with a lot of actual film. There are, of course, options for developing motion picture film at home, and I'm going to be talking about some of that stuff in the future pretty soon. But today I'm going to be talking about digitally transferring Super 8 film outside of a lab, and I'm going to be doing so using some equipment that was supplied to me by the German company Film Digital, which offers some different things to be able to do this yourself outside of using a lab and scanning services. Film Digital recently sent me a modified Bauer T610 Super 8 projector, an LED light source, and a macro lens attachment for the projector so that I can transfer Super 8 myself. This is only a Super 8 projector and it will not take regular 8. They do have an option for that, or you can possibly use one of your own projectors combined with their lens and light source. Using the lens, I can attach a digital camera for capturing the film as it moves through the projector. Now, this method of transfer is technically called a telecine, and it's different from a motion picture film scanner. A telecine for motion picture film is a method of transfer where the film is played back in real time and captured while it's playing. So I put the film through the projector, and as it's running, I record a video of it playing. This method of transfer can give decent results, but does usually have its drawbacks. It's also been around for a long time, and you've maybe seen these old transfer boxes that you point a projector at and it bounces the image into a camcorder set up on the other side. An actual motion picture film scanner is a slower but higher quality method of transferring where the film is advanced frame by frame and captured. This ensures that every frame is captured clearly, and then those images are compiled into a video file for proper playback. For working with transferring Super 8 film at home yourself, there's a few different options for how to go about it. First is the Wolverine or the Kodak Rios scanning units. They're relatively cheap, costing only a few $100s, and will transfer the film in either 720 or 1080 resolution. These units are somewhat poorly constructed, and the results to be had are also very poor when compared against other methods. They are, however, pretty easy to use and affordable for an individual to pick up, and that's really like the best thing I can say about them. I've already looked at the Wolverine scanning unit and done a video about it, and really the less time that I have to spend thinking about it, the better. Beyond that, there are people who have converted projectors or created machines to do frame-by-frame advance and capture using a digital camera. There's some amazing DIY projects out there that I've seen, but it takes a lot of work to be able to assemble something like that properly, so not necessarily the most accessible for beginners either. You can also just project your film and record it right off the wall, and this of course has its drawbacks. You have to do the best you can with the angle you can achieve, and you're limited with how bright the projector's bulb is. The Bauer projector is one that they have modified themselves, but it's not entirely necessary if you have certain other types of projectors available to you, and I'll mention some specific ones later on. The main pieces here are the LED light and control panel, and the lens that lets me turn this projector into a transfer device. The LED light source is the same size as the bulb that many Super 8 projectors take, so it sits inside of the projector in place of the standard bulb. This projector has the LED actually installed into it, so I plugged the control box into a custom 3-pin port on the back. You can get the light source as a standalone unit though, and just use it with the side panel of your projector removed. This means that you no longer have to worry about the heat that the projector bulb gives off, and normally a projector bulb just either turns on or off, and that's all the control that you get. This light can be controlled by using the control box, and it gives me control over the brightness and the color of the light. This is very useful because you can make adjustments based on if you're scanning color reversal or negative film, and you can also adjust white balance settings on the camera to eliminate that orange base for inverting negative film later on. The light source can be bought individually and used with a lot of these older projectors. The macro lens is a big part of the system, and it allows me to attach a digital camera to the front of the projector so that I can achieve drastically better results than I would if I were to just record a projection. This is a C-mount lens that goes into an adapter for the camera. In this case, I'm using a micro 4/3 digital camera, which is a Lumix GH5. The lens goes where the projector lens would have originally gone. First, I move it in or out to find a general focus where the edges of the frame are sharp. On this projector, the original focus knob has been removed and the lens can be tightened into place using these screws here. The camera mounts to the front using the lens adapter, and if I want a tighter framing, then I can also use this spacer that goes between the adapter and the lens. With the camera mounted, I'll load up some Super 8 so that I can set precise focus and frame everything up properly. The orange area of the lens can be rotated to adjust the focus, and using the magnification on the camera, I'm able to set a sharp focus on the grain of the film. The image from the projector will also be upside down, and you can easily flip it and then crop it later in editing. This middle section has little screws that you can loosen, so then you can adjust the camera from left to right or up and down ever so slightly to make sure that you're getting a proper framing. With all that set up, I'm able to just start projecting. The biggest drawback of using a projector as a telecine device is the flickering that you typically get as a result of the shutter in the projector not being in sync with the shutter of the capture device. And that's still the case here, but there's some great results to be had, especially when combined with post-processing work on these video files. Projectors that Film Digital offers have been converted for different speeds. This specific model no longer runs at exactly 18 frames per second, but instead is slowed down slightly to 16.6 frames per second, so that it will sync really closely with a digital camera that has a shutter set to 1/50th of a second. They also offer ones that can be sped up or slowed down even more through the use of a special speed control box that plugs into the modified projector. I've done some testing with this setup and found that I'm getting best results when recording at 30 frames per second and setting my shutter to 1/50th. This has reduced the flicker by a lot, and I've found that this looks especially good for capturing reversal film, as the small amount of flicker that's happening from the shutter is pretty hard to see in the video file. Color negative film is where I notice it more, however, such as here in the sky, which means that I'll have to do a bit of work later on to remove that. If you're working with regular projectors though, then certain cameras such as this GH5 and the Lumix GH6 or the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras allow you to adjust the shutter speed in much smaller increments to achieve a closer sync to the shutter of a projector that's running at a normal 18 frames per second. This Bauer model also has a gate that is easy to modify for a slightly larger frame area to get a bit more out of the transfer. It has a plastic mask that can be cut out without damaging the actual area that the film comes into contact with. That means I get a little more in my transfer, which also allows me a little more area to work with when I'm stabilizing the footage later on. The system works really well. The optics are nice and sharp, and the LED control is something that's great to be able to put into these older projectors. With telecine though, there can be a lot of post-processing involved in order to get really good results, which is fine, but it does mean that it's not necessarily the most accessible way of transferring film. The transfer has two main problems: the mild remaining flicker and ghost frames. After scanning any color negative rolls, I've found that using the flicker-free plugin for After Effects by Digital Anarchy does a great job of removing the flicker that I couldn't reduce during the actual transfer. This might take a bit of time depending on how fast your computer is and how big your files are though. Like each 50-foot roll of Super 8 takes 2 or 3 hours for me in After Effects to spit out the finished video. But the final result is definitely worth it. I mean, my MacBook's a little old, and this is also me working with 4K files just to see what the maximum quality I can get is. Then there's ghost frames. As close as I can get to syncing the shutters and reducing that flicker, I still have frames in the video file that shouldn't be there. And this is because the camera has a constant frame rate that it's forcing this capture to conform to. These frames are the combination of 2 frames on the film, which gives me a ghost image, and they shouldn't be there because when you're playing things back, it looks just a little odd. It's not easy to remove these frames. You could take your video files and export them as image sequences, and then you could manually go through and delete all the weird frames and then put that back together into a new video file, but then that might give you issues with like finding the proper playback speed and everything. It's not easy. Film Digital offers a series of plugins for the program Virtual Dub though that does a good job of removing these extra frames sometimes so that the transfer plays back a little more like it should. This is however a private plugin that they have put together, and I'm not able to show this off in detail because of that. But programs like AVI Synth and Virtual Dub have ways of working with duplicate frames like this, and there's resources online for some of that. You can also experiment with a plugin for After Effects called Duplicate Frame Remover 3, which I've had a bit of luck with as well for this. Or you can just ignore those ghost frames entirely. I started to just lose my mind over it after a while because I was just looking at them so much that I could not see them. Besides that, there's also the factor of using an actual projector here, and this means properly cleaning and blowing out the film path to keep everything maintained. It's easy for dust and hair to get into the projector, and there's always the chance that something goes wrong even in a reliable projector. You'll also have to do some stabilizing because of the movement that the projector adds to the film. For being able to do this at home, I don't mind the work that I have to put in to get it to look good. Let's take this color negative footage for example. I've captured it at 30 frames per second in 4K from the projector that is playing it in 16.6 frames per second. Then I've removed the flicker and as many ghost frames as I can. Exported a new file that's 18 frames per second, which is the correct playback for it. And in DaVinci Resolve, I've inverted the color and done some grading to make it look better and applied some stabilization to get something that I'm pretty happy with considering it's captured from a projector. As good as I can get it to look, it's not a proper frame-by-frame capture. If we take a look at it against a lab scan, we can see that the frames are properly captured without any odd blended ghost frames or artifacts or anything odd as a result of the telecine. I was lucky enough to have this projector supplied to me by Film Digital to check this all out, and it's a great projector, but it isn't specifically needed for this setup. This entire setup with the projector, the light, and the lens is priced at 1889 euros. For other projectors though, they've also recommended the Bauer T502, T510, T525, T610, T183, T280, T240, the Elmo GS series, the Braun Visa Q-Stick 100, 1000, or 2000, the Bolio 708 EL, and for 16mm projectors, the Bauer P8 series and the Siemens 2000. Other ones may work as well, but these are the best recommended ones from them. They do offer entire 16mm setups through their website as well, and it's going to be about the same kind of workflow as the Super 8 one, just bigger. The lens that they offer works best with projectors that take a 28mm diameter lens, but they also offer lens adapter sleeves as well, and you can contact them about that. The lens that I've shown off in this video is 590 euros. And for the LED, the projector should take a halogen bulb and not one of these much older ones that you see on certain Super 8 projectors and 8mm projectors. The LED control is priced at 369 euros. This setup might be a bit much if we're thinking about it as an individual who's just buying it in order to avoid having to take their film to a lab to get transferred every time they have something developed. But I think it has a lot of appeal for arts centers or schools, places that are interested in doing this, maybe supporting a community, but don't have $10,000 or more to spend on a full film scanner. Or maybe as an investment for a side hustle, because you could take this setup, put a little bit of money into it, get a nice digital camera, and then transfer some really good looking home movies for people that are kept in a box somewhere. And it's gonna look way better than like the Wolverine unit, which is what a lot of people default to for this. You have to keep in mind that you do need to have a solid digital camera in order to get results similar to what I've shown off in this video. The macro lens especially is maybe the most accessible part of what's offered by Film Digital. You can use this with a good projector and have solid results with a bit of extra work. Maybe you've already converted a projector for use with an LED, or you've modified one for frame-by-frame advance. The lens has given me great results and is the component I would recommend the most. Flicker-free and DaVinci Resolve and the techniques I've shown off in this video can be applied to your own system as well. And as we're seeing cheaper and better mirrorless video cameras, we're also seeing more possibilities to accomplish good transfers of film yourself. Overall, the drawbacks here are the same drawbacks that you get with telecine setups in general, but I do think that the results I've gotten from this setup look much better than most telecine setups that I've seen. I love a good high quality lab scan, and this definitely doesn't replace or necessarily compare in the same way to having your film scanned. But being able to do some of this at home is something that I'm really happy with, because it's also something that I've wanted to do for a long time. Thank you so much for checking this out. I will link to everything that I've talked about down below in the description of this video, the Film Digital website, but then also resources for DIY projects and other ways that people have transferred and built transfer machines and setups themselves at home. Because this is a great option for looking into, but there's also different things to explore out there depending on your technical proficiency level of like working with microcomputers and 3D printing and all that awesome stuff. Thank you again so much to the Film Digital people. They have sent this along. They supplied me with this stuff. They've allowed me to play around with it. And I really, really love being able to scan and work with my own film outside of a lab, even though I really, really also do love having access to lab resources in the city or just wherever I am, because it's really important that those resources continue for other people who don't want to do this stuff themselves at home. It's been a little bit since I've made a video, like a month or so. So usually I try not to go that long, but it's just been a little hectic lately. So there's some really cool stuff coming up, and just like a lot of possible stuff in the future that I'm still just trying to wrap my head around how to turn certain things into videos. But hopefully soon, motion picture developing by hand using chemicals yourself in a darkroom and specialty tanks and things like that into the new year coming up. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you soon.